notes, and then I have my PowerPoint. So I just want to make sure that you guys can see everything.
And we can.
Let's see. So is this in full slide view?
Yes, now it is.
Okay. So I won't be able to see my notes. Let's see.
So at the bottom, Megan, you should be able to, I actually can't see because the live transcripting is going over it. But
Okay.
there could be an option where you can present, but also maintain your notes. So at the bottom of the page, there's a grouping of icons.
Okay.
Of where it says notes. So the bottom of your screen.
Okay. So before I click on the share screen, I should be able to see my, nope. Nope. And my apologies, I thought.
No, so try going up to slideshow at the very top.
Okay.
You should be able to maybe present online. Not online, I'm sorry. You should just be able to present, maybe just try from the beginning and see if it should maintain your notes page. Is it not?
It's not. So I'm wondering if I just increase this, can everybody see? And I know that we're limited with time, and so I don't want to take up too much of the time.
That's not working very well.
It's not working. Is it working here?
Now we can see it.
Okay, all right. Is this okay for everybody?
As it looks okay to me.
Okay, great. All right. So my name is Megan Kalloo. My capstone project was Van Gogh's Starry Night, recreated and reimagined. The goals that I accomplished during this semester was learning Van Gogh's unique brushstrokes and other techniques he used to create the piece Starry Night. In doing that, I also wanted to develop an understanding of different mediums that I could use for my project to make it similar to Van Gogh's, but also stand out, and then ultimately produce a 2022 version of Van Gogh's Starry Night. So I just want to start off by telling a little bit about my story and how I decided on a passion project. So I'm a mother of 3. I'm newly remarried. I have a background in law. I always wanted to be an attorney, but that kind of changed when I found myself in higher education in 2008. So I have my paralegal degree, was on a law track in higher ed, and kind of put that on hold to seek a new adventure. When I learned of SOIS and the ability to craft your degree, I got really excited about it because I have a big interest in marketing and communications, but then also organizational behavior. And I thought to myself, how can I craft my degree to become kind of the ultimate candidate, right? So what do I need to be the ultimate professional in the area of work that I want to move into? So with that, I decided I would focus on program management, organizational behavior, leadership, marketing and communications, and public relations and advertising. That's kind of the whole of my degree. Now to kind of explain this a little further, something that I always told my children, and that's why I think it's important to tell this story, is that kind of that old adage of what do you want to be when you grow up? I think that there's more to that saying than just that. I think that it just doesn't have to be one thing. And so that's what I've always told my children, that what do you want to be during this chapter of your life? And so that's kind of how I've approached education and my varying kind of passions, right? So I'm taking this venture in SOIS with all of those things that I listed in program management, but my next step might be law school. So later in life, I can see myself going back to law school and becoming an attorney. And then when I was thinking about this passion project, I have such a passion for art. So I'm like, wow, I would love to retire and become a gallerist or an art history teacher or an art teacher. And how cool would it be to have this as part of my kind of portfolio of life, right? And then when I thought deeper into it, I've always been interested and kind of really enchanted by Van Gogh's Starry Night. So I settled on the Starry Night painting. And one other kind of thing to note is that I have never worked in acrylics before. I am an artist, but my mediums are charcoal and pencil, so very far off from what I'm comfortable with. So I thought it would be challenging in just kind of all different aspects and also fulfilling. So that's kind of my story and deciding on a passion project. Now moving into kind of the research and exposure and how I was going to get to this ultimate point. I knew from the beginning I really needed to immerse myself in his work. Fortunately, the Van Gogh's immersive experience was traveling to Rochester. It had started in New York City and it moved to Buffalo. I was going to get to the one in Buffalo, and then it just so happened that it lined up with this Capstone idea, and it was in Rochester. So I booked my tickets and went to that. When I went to this, I thought, what a awesome way to immerse myself in his work by actually stepping into his paintings. This immersive experience was a 3-room experience at the Dome. It had his work projected and also animated. So it really allowed me to see his brushstrokes and his technique in a maximum kind of size, and even animated, which was really cool. And it gave me an idea for how to proceed. So this is kind of a side-by-side of both of our pieces. This is kind of, I wanted to go into the background of his piece, and then how I kind of came to create what was going to be my 2022 Recreated and Reimagined Starry Night. So Van Gogh's Starry Night, it was based on his stay in a mental prison, a mental institution, asylum, Saint Remy in South France. It was actually, it was his view of the countryside through the bars of his room. His work really focused on the feelings and the memories and the emotions of that state that he was in. So he was in a very, very depressed state. This was right after he had severed his ear. So very kind of like a loss from reality. And this was the outcome of that. Now moving on to kind of my piece and the Recreated and Reimagined, I thought, wow, how similar to what we've experienced in COVID and with the shutdown, this feeling of being imprisoned at our homes, this altered reality. It's something that the majority of us had not faced quite to this level before, and what that did to your mental state and kind of your ability to see the world, and what that kind of, how it influenced everyone across the world. So that was what I really focused on and got into the mindset of, is how we've been living for the past 2 years when I started this piece. So just want to go a little bit more into detail on Van Gogh's Starry Night. So like I said, it was based on his view of the St. Remy Mental Asylum. This was his view of the night sky through the bars. Interestingly, this is one of 21 in a series of versions of this subject. So he created 21 other iterations of this. This is the only one that's said to be of the night sky. And it just so happens to be the most popular. I had no idea, and I've loved Van Gogh my whole life, and I had no idea that there were 21 series and versions of this. Now, one of the techniques that he uses in his art is called impasto. It's basically creating a thick textured appearance on the canvas using a loaded brush. So you're loading up the paint, the acrylic onto the brush and putting it on the canvas in a way that it adds some kind of structure and height to it. Another thing that Van Gogh is known for is the sky. So another focal point in his Starry Night is the swirling, the brush strokes, and the brushwork, and how it kind of evokes the feeling of movement, turbulence. It's almost a dreamlike depiction of the night sky. The colors are rich, deep blues, yellows, and greens. And it's kind of scattered throughout. One other thing that he does is he does very little blending, which creates a broken color effect. It actually reiterates the sense of movement and turbulence. And then it kind of helps in the sense of just the feeling that you get of movement in the picture. Another prominent feature in this photo is the cypress tree up front. The cypress tree is said to be associated with cemeteries and death. And so it was interesting learning about that and then figuring out how I was going to incorporate that into my piece. And I'll move on to the next slide and it'll make a lot of sense. So this is my finished product. So it's actually the same size as the original. I will say that that was a happy mistake, and I'm not sure how much I believe in the coincidence of it. I think it was meant to be, but I selected the frame, I fell in love with it, and then I found out afterwards that it was the exact same size as the original Van Gogh Starry Night. So it's 24 by 36. I am very excited for everyone to see it in person at the symposium. But I wanted to focus on the same focal points pretty much. So just kind of going backwards, starting with the black cypress tree, and that's kind of associated with cemeteries and death. For my piece, I really still wanted to maintain that as a focal point because there was a lot of death and loss associated with COVID. So I thought, it needs to remain prominent in my piece. The night sky with the vivid colors and the creating that dreamlit-like technique, I really focused hard to mimic exactly his brush stroke and evoke that feeling of that altered reality, because I think that a lot of us felt that over the 2 years. One other thing that I really wanted to portray in this piece was the beauty of nature and everything that kind of goes with that. I think that over these past 2 years, a lot of us have found a new appreciation for life and the preciousness of it, and seeing that in the world through a different lens. So I really wanted to capture that in the nature of this piece.
Megan, you have 2 minutes.
Okay. Oh, wow. Okay. Let me go real fast. So additionally in this, I added people into the windows. So the difference between Van Gogh's piece and mine is that the structured, actually, you know what, I will move on to the other slides and just comparison. So these are just comparing our brush strokes, his over here and mine on the right. And you'll see that there's green, which gives the impression of blending because yellow and blue make green, and it's kind of like a transitional effect. And here, so this is where I was getting to with the difference in structure. So I added some more real vividness to the village so that you could see the people in the windows, and give that sense of isolation and loneliness. This the cypress trees, so the difference here, and this has an animated feature but it doesn't in this mode. This was our side by sides, and this kind of just shows the texture. What I did for this was mix acrylic and flour together, and put it in a pastry piping bag and piped it onto the canvas so that it could have some real height, and then went in and painted over it after it dried 72 hours later. And so this is how long do I have, Stephen?
You have 45 seconds.
Okay, my video is 46 seconds.
All right, do it.
Okay. Oh, come on. Running out of time. Takes a minute to load. Not sure it's going to happen. Oh, it is. So this is just a time lapse. I will say I am not a videographer. So I lost some I lost some of the videos in the transition. So you'll see a big jump. But this is over 20 hours of video condensed into 46 seconds. So we can kind of appreciate the process. I wish I hadn't missed some of the pieces, but it's still, I was very happy with the end product. Yeah. So that was it.
I gotta say, Megan, we've seen a lot of creative projects in this course, but this is up there. Wow.
Oh, thank you.
Meg, do you want to go first? Do you have any questions prepared? I'm a bit of a lost of words here. I'm blown away by it.
Yes, I do. I've got a couple questions. Did you get a chance to summarize, Megan, or are you?
Yeah, I think I did. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, all right. So I thought that was really, really interesting. I appreciated the parallel. I really appreciated the background on how you kind of ended up with this project, and specifically too, just your zigzag pathway. We of course appreciate that in SOIS, you know, and the fact that you've, this is just one part of your journey and you don't know what will come next. Can you give us a little bit of maybe a peek into what you think you might have planned?
Yeah.
I'm assuming you're graduating this spring.
Yes.
So what you plan on doing moving forward, and then is the project done, or is there something else that you want to do with it afterward?
Oh, okay. Yeah. So I do have plans to stay at RIT in higher ed. I do want to move into more of a marketing and communications role, and being able to be a bit more creative. I'm currently working with students, and that is so fulfilling. And I've worked with students for 14 years. And yeah, we're at an institution that services students. But I think that I can use my talents in a different, in a kind of different way now. And so I'm comfortable with kind of moving into a different way to engage the students in marketing and communications. And then I thank you for asking that if I'm done with the piece yet, because this has really been fulfilling, creating the piece. It gave me so much confidence in my artistic skills. Very, you know, not too confident before, and this really built it up to another level. And so I do want to continue to recreate some of his pieces. I'm absolutely in love with his work, and it's really therapeutic. So I do plan to create some more of his pieces, and going to the immersive experience was so much fun. And I learned about so many of his pieces that I didn't actually realize existed, that I just want to learn more about.
Thank you. And that I can't wait to see it in person at the symposium. And 24 by 36 is the exact size of the poster. So we'll make sure we have a second easel set up so that you can have your capstone poster and then also display your painting. So really nice job.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you.
So like we talked about before, like I suggested before, you really got to go to Amsterdam and see the Van Gogh Museum. I mean, that really should be right at the top of your travel plans.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
I have one question. So talk me through why you decided to put people in the windows, whereas Van Gogh, I don't know whether it occurred to him, but he didn't do it. So what's the thing? What's going on there?
Yeah, I think the biggest difference was that so his view of the night sky was from his window within the asylum. My recreation of it was our view from in our houses, and that feeling of imprisonment, of being in an asylum almost, and having this altered sense of reality. I think we were all affected by the shutdown, and a lot of it was, I mean, all of it was out of our control. So that just feeling of loss and control and forced isolation, that's what I wanted to get across in my iteration of it.
I wonder what he would say about that.
I wonder.
Okay, would anybody else like to ask any questions?
I have a quick question, Megan, and I'll try to be very quick, but so the parallel is really interesting to me. I think it's really a great project, and I was really struck by the cypress tree, and you know, I guess the question is, you were really intentional about making that prominent and sticking out by mixing the flower in, and that really emphasizes, you know, in some ways, I guess the aspect of death around COVID. And I'm curious, did Van Gogh, was his cypress tree elevated or thickened, or you know, I don't know the proper technique, but I mean, it's really interesting to me.
My understanding was that it was just as heightened as the rest of his piece, so using the impasto technique. So it had a little bit of thickness and texture to it, but not as prominent as it is in my piece. But I do know from research that he really intended for that to be one of, I mean, it's the most prominent, I think, aside from the sky but I think they're on kind of a different level of how they reel you in. But just in where they were in the time, there was a lot of death. He was kind of in this depressive state, and so the cypress tree, I think, had a lot of symbolism, and it had a lot of different symbolism, I think.
Thank you. I just really like how you know, created your own version in terms of your emphasis with regard to COVID in that regard.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks a lot, Megan. And we're going to go on without more ado to Ella. You're up.
Okay. So I'm sorry to say my project is not nearly as pretty as Megan's. It's all numbers. So my name's Ella Ross. My degree is in film, business, and math, which for the past couple of years, when people have asked me what my degree is and I tell them, they look at me very confused. So I had kind of the challenge of trying to incorporate everything that I was learning about in my degree into a project. So that was almost in its own way the biggest challenge of making a capstone project. So I decided to do a regression analysis of film data. So regression analysis is simply trying to figure out the statistical significance of external factors on some variable. So because I want to go into film, the obvious choice was to try to determine a film's gross by different factors in its production. So my first step in trying to do this was I needed data, right? I'm going to try to write some code to have an analysis of some data. So I had two options for this. I first considered making a web scraper of my own, which is somewhat of a pain, but I was going to do it. but I decided, let me look, see if somebody else has done this compiling for me. And I found it. I went on Kaggle, which is an open source data set collection where different people can upload data sets that they have scraped themselves. And I found this data set with 45,000 different entries into it. So this was perfect for me. So I took this data set and I wrote some coding to start my analysis. I used R code. R code was specifically made for this sort of statistical analysis and for graphing. I'm also comfortable in R, so I decided to code in R. That's what it looks like. As I said, not nearly as pretty as Megan's. It's all just looks kind of like nonsense. But this is several different model. This is the code for several different models I made, several different iterations to try to correctly identify what was actually going on in my data. I landed on a final model that I think described things the best. And that was the output R gave me. Looks great, right? It's number soup. So the real challenge here is trying to comb through what the code can give you to try to make any sort of determination about reality. If I could actually say what I thought was going on in the economic side of the film industry. So quick side note about actual math before I talk about my results. When you're doing this kind of analysis, there's two ways you can probably model your Y variable, my Y variable here being revenue. You can have it in level form or you can have it in logarithmic form. Fundamentally, what these two different things will do for you, level will say, for me, revenue based on certain input of budget, let's say, whereas the log one will say a percentage change in revenue based on an input such as budget. So say this was the data. It's very, each of those dots is a data point, right? Modeling it linearly would look like this. You're trying to fit a straight line to a kind of curved spread of data, whereas a log function could fit it more closely and be kind of a curve. So those are the difference in the models you could make. And depending on what your data is, one will probably fit it better. I found through my analysis that a log function fit my data better. It more closely described what in fact was going on within the data set. But for the purposes of this presentation, I am going to talk about a level form of my model because it is easier to understand, particularly if you're not familiar with the kind of terms I'm talking about. So I'm going to be talking about a level form, though log fit my data better as it happened. So the first big variable that I found to be statistically significant in trying to estimate a given film's revenue was budget. I think that's not a surprise to anyone. What your budget is probably going to affect what gross your film has. So as you can see over there, these are my revenue is Y based on several coefficients of X. That little function there says that if we're really close to the origin, right? Meaning we have a really small budget, say a $1 budget, which all those $1 films out there, you're going to expect to get a revenue back of $1.08. So $1 in gives you $1.08 back, which is actually a pretty good profit margin for any industry. That's what it looks like when you're really close to the origin. But because I decided to use a quadratic form for this variable, again, because it best fit my data, this means as the budget gets higher and higher, my graph actually looks like this. So it kind of curves upwards. The higher the budget, the more dollar for dollar you get back. So when you get up to a $20 million budget, for every dollar you put in, you'd expect $1.09 back. So I found that the more and more you put in, the more dollar for dollar you get back. This makes sense if you think about just the world in general. A small indie film is less likely to get back a big amount of revenue than, say, Marvel. You can also kind of think about it from the opposite end. If you're a production company and you've got a film that is going to make a lot of money, it's the 19th Star Wars film, right? You're more likely to give it a higher budget because it has a better chance of having a good profit margin. As you can see, a big part of this kind of analysis is trying to find the reasoning behind those numbers. If you have some numbers where you think, okay, well, I'm a human living in the world, that doesn't make sense. That's not how I experience reality. There's probably something wrong with your model. So this all seems reasonable so far. We can be pretty confident on our results. The next big factor that I found that affects a film's revenue is runtime. Now, I did, as it says down there, I did have a data set where the entries weren't 1 minute long. They were 26 to 338 minutes. So they were all short films. Some were in there, but largely significantly long films. So my coefficient says that for every minute of runtime, we expect $700,000 back and change, which, again, thinking of causality, that sounds like, okay, if I add an extra minute to my film, I'll get another $700,000 back. That's not the case. The films that are made to be longer films are usually the ones that have a bigger budget and have probably a big movie star, and so are more likely to have a greater revenue. Causality is a big thing in this kind of analysis. The last kind of big section of variables that were significant in this analysis were Boolean variables. These are what you might call yes/no variables. They can take on the value of 1 or the value of 0. They're either true or they're false. The first one is the best example, being US. So if the film was made in the US, it gets a 1, and if it's made elsewhere, it gets a 0. So this says that if a given film is made in the US, you expect it to make $16 million more than if it was made somewhere else. So that includes every other country. If I did a more direct comparison to a country with another big film industry, say India, you know, and did a direct comparison, it would probably be not as great of a difference between being made in the US versus being made in India. But this is the US versus anywhere else. You pick up a random film, what you'd expect US to make compared to another one. And this makes sense. The US has the biggest film industry in the world currently. It's pretty reasonable. The other kind of section of Boolean variables, I'm going to call them, throwing them all together, is the genre. With my data set, I made an exhaustive list of the different genres that were listed. And I ran an analysis to see, again, Boolean variables, if they had any effect on budget. And these were the 6 that did. Now, again, quick note about math so that this makes any sense. As I said, these are yes/no variables. And I made a reference point of romance movies. Just happened to be the last one I put in. And the reference point means I needed something for them to be in reference to, right? So an animated film we're expected to make $61 million more than a romance. So romance is the reference. Romance is the 0 value in my analysis. So as you can see, from some genres, you expect them to make less, and for others, you expect them to make more. These were the ones that were statistically significant out of all the genres I put in. I put in many more than these 6. To take a quick jot into statistical significance, because I've mentioned that a couple of times now, there's something called a p-value, which we calculate. It's a probability value. We say that if it's less than 0.05, that p-value, that we can consider this effect to be statistically significant. That value just means that there's a 5% chance that this variation happened randomly. So all the things I've talked about so far have a very low chance that this is a random variation in the Boolean variables and budget. All of that is a random variation. There's a very small chance that it's a random variation in my Y value revenue. The last thing I did with my analysis was I took a look at time. I actually met with Professor Breed Hannah over in the economics department. I took econometrics with her last semester, which is part of what gave me the idea for this. And she suggested I look to see if time had any significance. And honestly, no. So I ran an analysis. I split my data set up into the decades. Again, Boolean variables. They have no statistically significant effect. You can see the 10s down there. That's the 1910s. Down at the bottom says not applicable. That is, again, my reference point, just like romance was. I wanted them to be interesting. I really did, but they're not. It does not have a significant effect on your dollar in, dollar out output, what decade a film was made in. The other suggestion she made in reference to time was to take a look at a normal year versus 2020. I thought that was interesting to see if we could actually see the economic crash in our data. So kind of the question was whether it would look like this, the graph on the right, if there was actually going to be a catastrophe that you could see. So I did this by looking at 2018 versus 2019, two normal years, and then 2019 versus 2020. So as you can see for 2018 versus 2019, that variable down there that says 19, that's a Boolean variable, whether it was made in 19 versus 2018. And my p-value over on the right of that little block is 0.969. That means there's a 97% chance that that variation happened randomly. We can be pretty sure that there was not really a difference between the revenue for 2018 versus 2019. Whereas if you look at 2019 versus 2020 on the bottom, the p-value for being made in 2020 versus 2019 is 0.068. Now that's technically out of our range of what we consider statistically significant. But again, that says that there's a 7% chance that this variation happened randomly. So we might want to be a little more cautious, but and saying that that coefficient is in fact the right coefficient, but we can be pretty sure that we did have a negative impact on film revenue by going into the year 2020 versus the year 2019. And those were the big findings I found from my analysis. There are always other things I could add, but I felt pretty confident in this model that this correctly described what was going on in the industry. So there we go.
So thank you, Ella. That was totally fascinating. So this, I mean, film studios must do this sort of study, right? I mean, I would think when they're trying to make decisions go this way or that way.
So yes and no. When you're talking about this, it sounds like, okay, if I have something that's a Western that we're making in this year with this amount of budget, I will get this revenue. It's less that and more that we're looking at the trends of what we can expect. You know, imagine you have a random pool of films, you grab a film out from there, what you could reasonably expect. It's all about probabilities. So film studios, I've actually found, don't do this that often. Because this kind of regression analysis is really an economic tool as opposed to a decision-making tool.
So, well, I'm not sure I follow that that distinction, but so if I got it right, if I have a large amount of money that I want to invest in a movie that somebody's come up with, if the movie is about a family, is family oriented, and it's going to be made in the US, and it's going to be a lengthy movie, and the more money I put into this movie, the more I'm going to get back with those four main variables. Is that, am I wrong?
No. When you're deciding to make a film though, there are other factors that I am unable to put in an analysis like this that'll make a bigger effect. I was not able to put in what production company, I was not able to put in what directed it, who starred in it. So this is showing us trends as opposed to, I know exactly what I'm going to get back based on these four factors.
I see.
Does that make sense?
Yes. So, but could you refine it? I mean, we've talked in some of these sessions about students wanting to take their project further into the future and do more with it. Could you refine this model to add those other variables that you haven't added at this point in time?
Possibly, particularly production company. It happened not to be in my data set, but that is one that definitely I could add. There's a couple of other things I could add. Some of them are a little bit out of the range of possibility, such as, do you have a big movie star? That's the kind of thing that it's very subjective.
Yeah.
So it's harder to put in a number analysis such as this.
I see. Well, thank you. It was fascinating. Meg?
Thanks, Stephen. So Ella, I thought that was really, really interesting. And I would even argue that depending on who you ask, equally as beautiful as what what Megan showed us. I think it's really interesting what you were looking at. So I guess my question is, did you comb through the data with an idea of what you wanted to find, or did you comb through the idea just for something that would be significant that you could draw conclusions from?
sorry, I'm not quite sure. Not sure I understand the question. Could you?
So when you started combing through the data, I guess what I'm wondering is, were you looking for these statistical significant items because you expected to find them, or were you combing through just to see where there were some significant conclusions you could draw from?
So the way I determined statistical significance, I had to put the variables in my model first. So as I showed you in that R coding earlier, there was, I believe I had 10 to 12 different models before I landed on this one that I thought described it the best. And some of those variables were statistically insignificant. So I cut them. It's not something that I could comb through the data set and see if something was statistically significant. I had to put it through my model. And so my ending model, all the variables that I had in there were statistically significant.
Got it. Okay. And are you done, or do you want to take this further?
So I don't think I'm done. I'm not sure this is something I'll pursue so actively, but I think this is something that I'll always come back to and see what I can add, see if I can find more through it. I feel like I'll come back to this again and again.
Really interesting. Thank you very much.
Ella, you said at the beginning that you're interested in film, business, and math. Those are your areas of your discipline areas. So is this something that you could take to Hollywood and see if somebody be interested in working with you on it?
Yes. So the goal is, my goal is to be a film producer. So that's the business side of the film industry. So absolutely, yes.
I see. Cool. Great. Well, I don't know. I haven't been watching the time. I guess we have time for a couple more questions if anybody has them.
I have a question. Is it possible to take the data from this and apply it to what individual theaters make?
I believe it is possible to do a regression analysis of what individual theaters make. I'm not sure we could apply this data set to it because this has to do with a given film's revenue, not a given theater's revenue.
Is there like no correlation between the two that you could pull? Because this is some really good work.
I mean, there's certainly a correlation of what a theater would make for a given film.
Yeah.
It would just be different numbers, probably the same statistical significance, but different input to output. So you'd want to be careful, but you could definitely draw some conclusions from this with respect to theaters.
That's incredibly fascinating. This is some good, really cool work.
Thank you.
Any other questions out there?
I just had a real quick question. Nice work. Hey, how many variables did you start with?
I believe the first model I had only had 4. So I think I just put in budget, whether it was made in the US, whether it was made in English, and the runtime.
But in that database, you must have had a large set of variables, right? A large set of data. And then you narrowed it down based on statistical significance, correct?
Sort of. So in that data set I had, there were some things like, I believe there was one that was rating. Somebody had put out a poll for the general public and they gave a rating from 1 to 10. Stuff like that, I edited out. I did not put in as a variable because that's not something I really have a way of determining what it means in relation to my revenue. You know, okay, it had a rating of 7. What does that mean? It has no basis. So there were some things like that. I believe my data set also happened to have, you know, the title of the film, the tagline of the film, things like that, that I couldn't really put in number form, so couldn't be in this analysis.
Okay, I guess where I was going to go with that was I was just curious if you found certain variables that were correlated with each other and did that cause a problem in your regression analysis, right? Confounding variables.
Yeah. So the answer is that could have been the case and it wasn't. I did do a couple of tests to check for what's the word? Exogeny, to make sure that they the variables were not connected to one another. But that definitely happens in this kind of data set. I just happen not to find it.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ella. I think we better go on now. And Nye, it's your turn. Take it away.
Yeah, of course. So first off, I'm getting over a little cold, so I'm sorry if I sound a little bit hoarse. If you need me to repeat anything, just let me know.
Sure.
Let me just share my screen. Okay. Can you all see it?
Yep.
Okay. Hold on. Get it on full screen again. Okay. So this is my presentation. It is musical improv with Groovemind. This is a student band that I am personally involved with since last semester. And kind of like, if I do like a little background of how we all met, I knew the front singer, David, who's in the blue there in the front. Me and him are personal friends, and he's in RIT improv. And he came up with this idea. He comes up to me one day. He's like, "Nah, I know you're a drummer. I want to come up with this musical improv group, but we don't have a drummer. Do you think you could play with us?" And I was like, "Sure." Little did I know that they would become part of my Capstone project. So I guess starting from like the left here, that is Andrea. She is our flute player. Then next to her, that is Isaac. He's our guitar player. Next to him is our tambourine player. Her name's Emma. Then there's me. Then on the side of me is Dakota. And then of course in the front is David. So we are an independent musical improvisation troupe that performs and records music with classic improv elements, which I can get into a little bit later. But moving on. So some of the goals of this was first to learn improv. I had no experience when David came up to me and proposed this idea. So a lot of it was kind of learning from the improv people that are in this group, which 3 of the 5 members are improv members, David, Dakota, and Isaac. So all of them are originally in RIT improv, and they kind of showed me the ropes, and we play musical improv games with music twists on them. The second, I guess, goal would be to perform music in a group or a band. I've never had experience with this really. I've played with like performing arts groups on campus, and I really like it, but performing in an actual student band where you have to manage yourself and there's no one in that role of director can be sometimes a little bit hard to coordinate. The third goal would be to record and mix multiple instruments. A lot of them I didn't have experience mixing or recording, so it was a lot of kind of researching how best I can record and capture a sound and also mix it later on. The third is to release music on streaming platforms. Of course, if you make music, you have to show it to people, and streaming platforms are probably the best way to do it in 2022. And of course, the last goal is to have fun, because if you're not having fun, then why did you come? And the picture on the side here is from one of our very first meetings. So we came up with a group name, we came up with game ideas, we came up with cover ideas, which you'll hear later. And we started to write for background music, which is what I'll show you later as well. And then we tried switching between 2 chord progressions. Chord progression is basically kind of an assembly of notes that you play in order for the song to kind of sit on. So we had to come up with that. And then of course, the last one I kind of found funny was listen to Nye, because I'm the drummer, and you kind of always go back to the drummer to listen for the time to make sure that everyone else is playing along well. So the project timeline, roughly up to this point. In January, we started planning and rehearsing. A lot of that included trying to get spaces for us to rehearse for the semester. And then also just trying to come up with what it is that we're going to perform. February came more rehearsing. We finally got a cover song locked in. It's called Kyoto by Phoebe Bridgers. If any of you have ever heard of it, it's a beautiful song. I recommend looking it up. Then we did an introduction of our musical improv games and the theme song. So musical improv games, we played 2 of them. We started out with 3, but we dwindled it down to 2. One of them is called Hoedown, and then the other one is called Beastie Rap. In March, we did even more rehearsing, and we got some more of those games like finally locked in. You know, it was less of that kind of awkward, oh, what do I say? And more of like, this is how the game functions, and this is how we as a group are going to present it to people. And then we actually started recording our theme song in the annex. And then in April, this month, we performed at Improvimonium. That was April 1st, continuing to mix the song, and we are starting to rehearse for the symposium. So if I just go down to these pictures here, starting from the left, we have our Improvimonium theme. That's essentially the theme that you'll hear from the flute later on. That's kind of the, I guess, line that she plays throughout. The middle picture is of the drum set and Dakota kind of playing along. That was when we were trying to figure out what we were going to play for each instrument for the song. And then the last one is kind of, that was in the annex. That was me recording the drums, and I just kind of wanted to get a nice shot because I think it looked kind of sick. Then here are some of the things that I used. Instruments, there was keyboard, guitar, ukulele, flute, cajon, that was for one of our improv games. I didn't record it. And then harmonica, which is also for the recorded version. Tech, we used a mixing board, 2 amplifiers, 3 microphones, XLR cables, and 2 DAWs, or 3 DAWs. Ableton, which I primarily used to record and mix. Logic was some of the stuff that David was using to mix some of his vocal lines. And then Reaper was used to also record and kind of help with those other 2. Facilities, we used the music classroom in A130 that's in the SAU, web auditorium, and then also other members' apartments. I remember this one time we couldn't find space anywhere. So I was like, oh, well, my basement's free, so we can go down there and rehearse. And then, of course, people helped me out. Emma, I want to give a really big shout out to her because she originally wasn't part of the band. We decided to add a tambourine later on, and she kind of helped us out with that. David, of course, because he knows a lot of like mixing things, and wherever I was kind of lacking, he helped me kind of get back on track with certain instruments and how to mix them. Of course, Professor Hanny, who's here, Carl Stabnow, who is kind of in charge of the musical annex that we have here at RIT. If any of you have ever taken a look there, I really recommend it because it's beautiful. And then, of course, various friends of the RIT Improv Club, including Leo, who is also doing his capstone this year. Great shout out to him for organizing this. So some of the things that were kind of hard to come up with was scheduling. Scheduling was probably our biggest hurdle in terms of times to meet because everyone's schedule was everywhere. Spaces to rehearse because there's, as we all know, RIT has a limited amount of space for performing arts students, and even more limited when you're not in a specific group or band. And then, of course, spaces to record. Those are even more limited because of, again, just people always rehearsing, even in spaces where you're allowed to record. And also just getting a really good sound quality from all of the instruments. That was a little bit hard for me to kind of arrange, but we got through it. And then the second would be resources, especially gear. I think a few weeks ago, I was kind of talking to Professor Hanny. I was kind of going through like almost like a chicken without its head. I was running around. I'm like, I don't have any gear to record with. I don't know if I can do this, blah, blah, blah. But we got into contact with Carl. He responded, very nice. He let me use a few mic stands. And then I also have a friend who's in a music club that allowed me to use certain mics and their mixing board. Instruments was a little bit hard to coordinate as well. For example, we were switching between 2 guitars to try to see which guitar was going to add or detract from the song. We eventually decided to stay with the electric guitar, but we were playing around with possibly doing acoustic. And then, of course, performers. So originally the idea was to get more of the improvisational element in terms of like having performers, and then we would play music for them. But it didn't unfortunately work out. We got Emma, of course, but we did want at least 3 people to help us out with that. So one of the things that we use in order for scheduling to kind of make that less hectic was using When to Meet. I'm sure you all are familiar with that. It's a beautiful resource. And then we also have a checklist that we use specifically for our performance. So if you see there's drum set and cajon, then we had like instruments, we had mixer, audio interface, 2 amps, Isaac's amplifier, and then we had mics and things of that sort to kind of keep us all organized so that we didn't lose track of things. And then I'm sure you all are waiting for it, the performance. So I have a link here of it, and if I can open it up, should play for you a little bit. Let's see. So this was recorded April 1st for Improvimonium. So David will start off with keyboard, and then flute will come in after he does a couple rounds. And all these parts that you're hearing currently were all written down, and they're all originally ours. You will not hear this anywhere else. That we're going to checks. And then we'll go back into the A section after this. And then we will transition into the cover of the song. Apologies if you can't hear David clearly. He has the energy.
You have 2 minutes.
Okay. We can now skip into the actual improv element where we performed. I will show you the second one, which is Hoedown. So we get a suggestion. The suggestion was fire, And then the idea is you sing about that with the tagline or the punchline being about fire or relating to fire. And then I'll be on the side playing cajon for this. Oh wait, he might have messed up a couple times. Actually. And this is all improv. This is all off the top of the dome. Yeah, he messed up the first time and then second time. Yeah, that's a little bit. Wish we had more time, but yeah, that's essentially one of the games, Hoedown, and then BC Rap. Hopefully, you all will be able to experience that in person. But that concludes my presentation. If there's any questions.
Thank you, Nye. Tom's here. I don't know if you want to kick off the questions, Tom, since you know a lot more about this sort of thing than I do anyway. I'm not speaking for Meg, but.
Well, the improv section here, I don't know any more than you do. More the improv and the music. Now, how much improvisation was going on in the musical part of it?
Yeah, so the idea behind the music, that was all it all came up with like the people that play the instruments, they all came up with their parts. And essentially what we did was we put all of our parts together with, a common, I guess, a common understanding that it would be within a certain tempo and within a certain time frame. And what we did was we put all of those elements together, and that was the first song you heard. The second song was a cover, which I didn't play as much because it was more of like just adding to the music that was before. But then the second element was us coming up with musical improv games that we would incorporate musical elements. So this game that you just saw, Hoedown, that is a regular improv game from what I understand from David. But the musical element that we added to it was adding the cajon and the piano so that people would have music to help them with their songs. Because traditionally it would just be people singing and there wouldn't be any music. But that was kind of, I guess, part of the interest, but then the challenge of coming up with music for people to enjoy along with their improv. Because this whole Improvimonium was particularly improv troops, and we were the only musical improv group that was there. So we kind of added a different element with our set, if that kind of helps clear anyone's understanding.
And there was a little bit of improv even in the set music pieces, and we call that soloing in music.
Yes, there was. Yeah, that drum solo, that was purely improv, if you want to put that title on it. But yeah.
Right.
So I now, bouncing off of what you've just said, I have a question. So you talked about rehearsing for the symposium.
Mhm.
So how do you rehearse improvisation? I mean, isn't the essence of improvisation that it's new and you've improvised? I mean, but help me.
Yeah, of course. So I thought that same idea, Stephen. I was like, how are we supposed to rehearse these games if, they're supposed to be improv? But the whole idea behind it is that you have a certain format. So if I use the example Hoedown, again, as an example, the whole idea behind the game originally is supposed to be you get a suggestion from the audience. So let's say you throw out a random suggestion of puppy. We then have to come up with a song within, 5-10 seconds about a puppy, or the punchline being about a puppy or maybe dog, something like that. So a lot of our rehearsing would require someone that's probably not in our group, that doesn't know our senses of humor and how we kind of will come about certain ideas. they throw that out to us. And then with Puppy, we'll do like a song. And then the musical element that we've added to this is that I'm on cajon and then Isaac is playing the piano tune that you hear. Traditionally, they play this game on Whose Line Is It Anyway? If you've ever seen the
Right.
show,
Right.
you can get a really good idea of how they play that traditionally. But again, this is kind of like a musical twist on it. And then another thing that we rehearse for the symposium would be obviously the improvisation improvimonium theme, and then possibly the cover. We don't know if we're going to play that at the symposium because it's not really improv. That is probably the most definite thing that we play. But most of it would be the theme and then again, the games.
You mentioned a song, Kyoto?
Kyoto, yep.
So
Mhm.
I would like to listen to that. So how would I find that in a web search? Just
Yeah, sure. So it's spelled Kyoto and it's by Phoebe Bridgers.
Phoebe Bridges. Okay.
Yeah,
all right.
and you can look that up on YouTube, Google, any
Sure.
music streaming service.
Sure. Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Meg?
Thanks, Stephen. So Nye, that was really interesting. Since you haven't had a lot of experience, and that's why you wanted to do something in improv. What would you say is the biggest takeaway of doing something like this? I mean, you're a performer, you're a musician, so I can make my own connections there with improv. But what would you say is the biggest takeaway for you?
Yeah, for me, it would be first off working in a group with people that I had little to no exposure to. So like Isaac, Andrea, Dakota, and Emma, I didn't know them before this. So obviously that would be the first layer. But the second layer would be, and I think the more of the takeaway would be that I have a newfound appreciation for improv and how much work it actually takes for a lot of these performers to come up with something on the spot like that. It's not always just, oh, I'll just say whatever. And if someone laughs, that's what it is. It's more of like thinking of, okay, my punchline, I need something to lead to this. And it's kind of a journey that is different for everyone, but it's a journey that now I'm starting to take. And I'm actually going to be going to a lot more improv shows, both at RIT and professionally because of this. And I also have plans in the future to perform and possibly perform for RIT Improv with this group after graduating. So yeah, no, I have a newfound appreciation and love for improv. Yeah.
That's great. Thank you. Any other questions out there from anybody else?
You have
Real quickly, oh, I'm sorry, but now you still want to work in music production?
Yeah, that's definitely still a passion of mine. But I do think that having this experience, it's opened me more to just the entertainment side of things because music is not just in the music industry, it's everywhere. And, fingers crossed, if we ever were to go viral with any of these, I think we'd be adding a certain like niche, I guess, market in the whole improv world. So that'd be really neat to see. But yeah, music production still a love. Don't fret.
I was wondering if there are any future different kinds of genres you want to try out of music.
Yeah, so I guess our genre, I don't think I ever mentioned that, but our genre for like the actual theme is more of like an indie pop type of thing. But I'd like to kind of branch out. I've mentioned to the members in my band that I'd really like to incorporate jazz, especially because jazz is very improv like heavy. People need to come up with things on the spot when they play jazz. And I think that would add a really cool element to our improv set where maybe we're playing a jazz song and then maybe there's a line that someone says, and then we have to come up with a chord progression or something that will fit that suggestion. I think that would be really cool. And then maybe possibly, I've never dabbled in like country. That would be really interesting, country music. I know that Isaac, especially our guitar player, he really likes playing country music. So that could be something in the future for us. Yeah.
That sounds very interesting. Thank you for the presentation. This was really cool.
Yeah. Thank you for watching.
Well, once again, we have managed to go way over an hour. If my phone will answer, but I guess it's an hour and 10 minutes. Not so bad. Thank you very much to all of you, our guests too, and but mostly our presenters. A great selection. You know, this course is wonderful because we always get such a very broad selection across all the disciplines that you can take at RIT. So this was a particularly good. A good selection of 3 completely different projects. So thank you very much. We look forward to the symposium. Meg, last word?
Yep, just great job, everybody. And we look forward to seeing you on the 25th. Really proud of your efforts. We know you're balancing a lot of other things as you're finishing out the semester, and it's a sprint to the finish line, but really great job, and we'll see you soon.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye, Harrison.
Bye, Harrison.
Bye, Professor Ollie. Bye, Meg. I'll talk to you soon.
Are you still?
Hold on.